Welcome and good evening from Untold Happenings. Once again, we're bringing you on an unforgettable cruise tonight because the water conceals mysteries behind the luxury, the music, and the joy. These accounts of passengers going missing, cabins that shouldn't be there, and voices that continue to scream long after midnight are actual terror situations. There is no way out on the open sea, no police, no leaving the ship, nothing except limitless ocean and whatever awaits you in the shadows. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and get ready, because after hearing these tales, your perspective on cruise ships will change forever. Before we start, please make sure to hit the bell button, subscribe to Untold Happenings, and let us know in the comments where city and nation you are viewing from. Where our terror family is watching from would be great to know. I rode the elevator to Deck 9 on the third night of the vacation. However, it didn't end there. It began late at night, after the bars had closed, and it continued to a floor that shouldn't have been there. As I walked to the elevators, the carpet in the quiet hallways muffled my footsteps. I pushed the Deck 9 button. One by one, the numbers ticked upward as the elevator hummed, smooth as silk. 6, 7, 8, 9. However, it continued. The screen wavered. 10. 11, 12. I scowled. The ship had just 9 decks. After slowing down, the elevator abruptly stopped. With a gentle hiss, the doors slid open. My stomach fell. There was something different about the hallway outside. The carpet was ancient, tattered, and darkly discolored in areas I didn't want to think about. Overhead, half of the lights flickered and the other half were dead, buzzing softly. The scent of rust filled the air, as well as salt. I stepped out warily. My footsteps reverberated more loudly than they ought to have. All of the hallway's doors were securely closed. They were all assigned numbers. However, the figures weren't typical. 9A01, 9A02, 9A03. Earlier that day, I looked at the ship's map. There were no such cabins. A slight noise floated down the corridor, a murmur. I froze, straining to hear help. From one of the doors came the words, "Someone, please." I was unable to identify which. I tried the first handle with trembling hands. Locked. The second. Locked. The third slid under my fingers with ease. I paused. Then gave it a shove. The interior of the cabin smelled strongly like ocean and was damp and dark. I saw something unbelievable there, in the dim glimmer of the flickering light. A traveler. Or the one that was. As if they had just crawled out of the ocean, their lips were blue, their skin was pale, and water was flowing from their clothing. They looked at me abruptly. "You shouldn't be here," they murmured, and I staggered back from the cabin, my breath irregular and sharp. The passenger who perished didn't even blink, let alone come near me or attack. Sitting on the sopping bed, he dripped seawater down the carpet, which appeared to be older than the ship itself. His voice broke and gurgled with seawater as he murmured again, "You shouldn't be here." I stumbled along the hallway after slamming the door. I was followed by the murmurs. Not from a single angle. From each door. "Go," murmured dozens of voices in unison. "Get out! Go!" My chest constricted. I grabbed the elevator and pressed the button. The numbers on the screen wavered between unfamiliar symbols. The doors glided open, but this elevator was not the same as the clean, bright one I had previously used. There was rust on the walls. Puddles of brine formed in the corners, and the floor was damp, and there were words scraped deep by fingernails, imprinted into the metal. "Avoid riding alone," I retreated, my heart thumping. I noticed activity at the far end of the corridor at that point. Numbers. Wet, pale, stumbling in my direction. I recognized their faces from the lounge, the pool, and breakfast tables. Travelers. Travelers who had vanished. I rushed into the elevator and repeatedly pressed the close button while their mouths moved in tandem, whispering the same thing. You shouldn't be here. Cold, soaking palms smacked against the glass, and the doors closed. The elevator gave a tremor. Once more, the numbers were erratic. 11, 10, 9. The doors opened at last. Deck 9, as usual. Clean, bright, and brimming with joy and music, as though nothing had occurred. However, the elevator screen flashed again when I looked at it. Additionally, it briefly failed to display 9. 9A was written. I tried to tell myself it hadn't happened for hours. That I might have been intoxicated, exhausted, or dreaming. But I knew the truth in my heart. Deck 9A was the real floor. Furthermore, it was not intended to exist. Against all my sensible instincts, I went back to the elevator the following evening. I hit the 9. The screen wavered. 6, 7, 8, 9. Then, once more, 9A. I was back in that decaying hallway as the doors slid open, the lights dimmed, and the elevator jerked. This time, the air was cooler. My breath left me in a fog. Water collected at my feet after continuously dripping from the ceiling. My lungs were flooded with the smell of mildew and salt. The rumors, however, were worse than the stench. They began as soon as I left the house. Assist us. Let us go. Take my place. The door shut behind me. Panicked, I whirled around, but there were no buttons. The elevator cannot be called back. Only a flat, rusting steel wall. Going forward was the only option. I went by doors 9A01, 9A02, and 9A03 once more. I heard movement behind each one. Gentle footsteps. Scrubbing. Inhaling. Then I heard a familiar voice from one door. The woman who had disappeared 2 days prior was back. At supper with her husband, I had witnessed her giggling. She cried from behind the door, "Please, we're being held here by them. The ship isn't it. It's the ocean. It wants us." My heart was pounding as my hand lingered over the handle. Shall I open it? Let her go? The whole corridor trembled before I could make up my mind. Violently, the lights flickered, and all the doors suddenly sprang open. Travelers poured out, pale, wet. Their mouths whispered together, their eyes hollow and black. Replace him, take his place. Cold, slimy hands seized me from all sides and dragged me to one of the open cabins. I noticed a bed inside, wet, awaiting. My skull was filled with thunderous whispers. Remain motionless. It's your time now. The drowning passengers grabbed me by the wrists and ankles and pulled me toward the wet bed. Like iron bands, their hold was impossible to break. No, I kicked, twisted, and yelled, but their whispers just got louder. It's your turn. It's your turn. Your turn. As they drew me in, the smell of salt water filled my throat. Water dripped in steady streams onto the mattress, which sagged with moisture. The elevator had come back, so I looked toward the hallway. Clean, golden light glowed softly through its open doors, a way out. However, I was immobile. Their claws dug into my flesh as their hold grew more firm. Then I caught sight of her, the woman I had heard earlier through the door, the one pleading for release. She was now pale and shaking, standing at the foot of the bed. She opened her mouth. Take my place. She sprang at the drowning people holding me, not at me, before I could say anything. She screamed like an animal and clawed at them. Their hold relaxed for a moment. I only needed it. My heart slammed against my ribs as I sprang free and ran down the corridor. Dozens of voices called after me as the whispers turned into screams. Come back! Now it's your turn. I slammed my fist against the wall as I jumped into the elevator. Wet, clawed hands smacked against the glass as the doors closed. The elevator rattled as if it were being pulled between two different realities. 9A, 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 and then 9. The doors opened smoothly. Dazzling lights. Music. Laughter. Standard deck 9. Unaware, passengers walked by with their drinks in hand. The world returned to normal, but my stomach fell when I glanced down at my arm. I had a leaking wrist, drops of salt water trickling down my skin, and I could still hear it over the clinking of drinks and laughter. Faint, far away, resonating from deep within the ship. It's your turn. It's your turn. It's your turn. Story 2. A passenger fell overboard on the third day of the cruise. He disappeared under the waves, and we all watched. He returned the following morning, but something had changed. It began with mayhem. Crew shouting over the wind, people running to the railing, a scream from the upper deck. With my heart racing, I forced my way forward and spotted him, a man thrashing in the murky water below. "Overboard, man!" someone yelled. The alarms went off. There were lifebuoys thrown. However, the waves were too powerful and pulled him farther and further out until his head sank below the surface. Then he disappeared. Hours passed while the crew circled the area and used spotlights to search. Nothing. The ship's mood darkened around midnight when the captain made the worst possible announcement. Despite every effort, we could not recover the passenger. During dinner, some people sobbed and others muttered, "A maritime disaster." However, I saw him the very following morning, at the breakfast buffet, standing. I'm holding the plate, grinning, as if nothing had ever occurred. I went cold. My blood became icy. He was also spotted by other passengers. With forks halfway to their mouths, their features went pale. A glass was dropped and shattered all over the floor. He was the one. The same face, identical attire, the same wristwatch even. However, his eyes were incorrect. Too gloomy. It's too flat. Like a polished stone that doesn't reflect anything. "That's him," I said in a whisper to the man next to me. He shushed me in despair, saying, "That's the one who drowned." Refrain from speaking. "Don't look at him, please." The captain didn't say when he would be returning. There was no acknowledgement or explanation for why the man we all witnessed drowning was suddenly back on the decks. However, everyone took notice. During lunch, folks glanced at each other and whispered at their tables. The crew completely avoided him. They passed him rigidly, their lips squeezed together, their gaze turned away. His words were invariably incorrect. He seemed to be repeating someone else's phrase, and his remarks arrived a moment too late. Even though it was pouring and dismal outside, he would whisper, "Beautiful weather today." He might also call someone by a name he shouldn't have known. His smile was the most disturbing aspect. It was too broad, too much time. His lips extended till the flesh around them appeared ready to tear, as if he held it without blinking. I spotted him in the corridor outside my cabin one evening. He was facing the wall, standing motionless and grinning at nothing. He remained still for 20 minutes. He then murmured, "I can hear you breathing," without looking. Rumors began to circulate the following morning. Those passengers who had talked to him for too long had left. Their cabins were deserted, their toothbrushes lying wet beside the sink, and their bags unopened. The crew's consistent response to inquiries was, they disembarked early. Even though we were in the middle of the ocean, nobody sat close to him at dinner by the fourth night. The tables surrounding him were deserted, as if he were being followed everywhere by an unseen circle of fear. He didn't appear to mind, though. With his fork hovering just over his plate, he simply sat there grinning too broadly. Without consuming food, not consuming alcohol, merely acting. I had trouble sleeping that night. The quiet inside my cabin was worse than the storm outside. Nervous, I walked the room till I opened my door to let some fresh air in. And stopped. He stood directly outside. Not moving, I'm not knocking, simply waiting. The same over-wide smile spread across his face as he noticed me, and his head tipped slightly. His voice was hollow and dry, like if he hadn't spoken in years, and he mumbled, "You shouldn't be awake." With my heart pounding so loudly that I thought it may explode through my chest, I slammed the door shut and leaned my back against it. Minutes went by. Hours. I didn't get any sleep. I looked around the hallway the following morning. Empty. However, there was something waiting on my bed when I got back to my cabin. A wet timepiece. On the night he drowned, I had noticed the same one on his wrist. My hands were shaking when I took it up. It continued to tick, still in operation. However, the second hand was not making progress. It was going backward. It dawned on me then. The man who had gone overboard had not made it out alive. It wasn't he who had returned to this ship. His face was being worn by it. It was also growing more powerful. The ship began collapsing on the fifth night. The passengers refused to leave their cabins and congregated in groups, muttering. The crew avoided questioning and moved rigidly and silently. The ship itself seemed to be aware that something strange was moving through its corridors because the air felt thick and charged. It was, too, he, the man who drowned. However, he had stopped acting at that point. He was standing too close to a woman in the lounge, and I could see his smile growing as she retreated. With every head tilt, the bones in his neck cracked and he twitched. The lights flickered as she yelled, and I saw it in that blink. Not his face, not human. His features were reshaped, like wax, melting over a flame by something pale and slippery that stretched beneath his skin and pressed forth. The following morning, the woman was gone. The entrance to her cabin was ajar. The clothes were nicely folded. Unopened suitcase. Empty. I went with him that evening. I was too scared to be sane. I followed him down into the ship's guts, where no passengers were permitted, past the doors reserved for the staff. There was moisture in the air. Chilly. With each step, my breath became hazy. Then I saw him halt in the darkness. Water was flowing from his clothes as he stood in front of a metal bulkhead door, yet the floor was completely dry. For the first time, he turned and gave me a direct glance. Not the phony grin, not the empty gaze. His face broke open. Something long and shiny unfolded from within, and the skin peeled back like damp cloth. Teeth in rows. Where no eyes should be, there are eyes stacked. He drowned. A voice echoed in a chorus that wasn't his, layered and incorrect. He was borrowed by me. Next up is you. The lights went out. Water splashed across the dry floor as I heard footsteps running toward me in the darkness. As I rushed blindly, my lungs constricted, and I crashed through the corridors and up the stairs before smashing into my cabin and locking the door. Quiet. I believed I had gone insane. That is, until I looked in the mirror. I could see a smile on my reflection. Too big. Too much time. Similar to his. Story 3. My stateroom number wasn't on the ship's map when I looked at it. I initially believed it was an error, but then I saw that no one else could see my door. The trip began normally enough. Suitcases rolling across polished floors, laughter, and music. Cabin 6B12 was my assigned cabin. Nothing out of the ordinary. In the vicinity of the elevators, I glanced at the ship's directory. Cabins 601 through 611 and 612 through 621 were located on either side of Deck 6. However, 6B12 was absent. I asked a crew member, perplexed. After scanning my keycard, she scowled before forcing a grin. "Sir, it must be a typo." She led me down a small hallway that I had not previously noticed, but don't worry, I'll show you. This carpet was distinctive. It was older, darker, and had torn edges. There was only one door at the very end. 6B12 is my number. As she inserted the keycard into the lock, the crew member's hand shook. "Here you go," she said in a voice that was nearly inaudible. Then she rushed off. It was an odd room inside, smaller than usual. When I switched on the lights, they flickered. There was a slight smell of iron and seawater in the air. The oddest thing, though? The window. It displayed the hallway outside rather than the ocean. I took a step forward and gazed through the glass. I could see the light fixture, the carpet, and the door across the hall. Then I noticed something else. Me, standing outside, looking back. With my heart thumping in my chest, I staggered back from the window. It was not feasible. The ocean's boundless blue expanse toward the horizon ought to have been the scene. Rather, I saw myself in the corridor, but the May on the other side was still. He simply stood there and gazed at me. I gave a wave. He didn't, I yelled. There was no return sound. Then his lips started to move gently. I didn't comprehend at first. However, the words became evident after a moment. "Get out." Ice pricked my skin. I tripped over my own backpack and staggered back. Overhead, the lights flickered and buzzed softly. I glanced again and saw that the hallway window was normal, with a tranquil sea and a blue sky. It was jet lag, I told myself. Stress. A hyperactive imagination. However, the fear weighed heavily on my stomach. The first odd event occurred that night. At precisely 3:12 a.m., I woke up. To the dripping sound. I initially believed it to be the bathroom sink. However, I froze as I switched on the light. The carpet was wet. The floor was covered in a puddle of seawater that rippled as if it had been disturbed. I also noticed moist tracks leading to the window when I followed the path. The vision of the water was gone. Once more, it was the hallway. This time, though, the May outside wasn't by himself. Behind him, shapes were standing, dozens of them. Silent screams came from pale, hazy features that were pressed close together. I blinked. They had vanished. I requested a cabin change at the front desk the following morning. The man at the counter shook his head, scowled, and wrote into his computer. Cabin 6B12 does not exist, sir. I smashed my keycard against the counter. So what is this? He squinted as he took it up, and the color left his face. Where did you acquire this, exactly? I received it from you yesterday, I yelled. He slipped it back across the counter, his hands shaking. Cards with this number are not issued by us, ever. The more I pressed for information about 6B12, the more bizarre the responses got. The cleaning crew either shook their heads or rushed out without responding when I asked them. One woman crossed herself and hurried down the corridor after muttering something in a language I couldn't understand. Later that day, I made a basic attempt. I waved down a passing traveler from the end of the hallway. Could you please explain what you see down there? He shrugged after squinting. Nothing core, a wall only. A wall? Stunned, I inquired. How about the door? 6B12? He regarded me as though I were crazy. Although I could see it, I said, there isn't a door there. As clear as day. The light glinting on the metal numbers. I still have my suitcase next to it. I pointed directly at it and pulled him in. There, that's right. Confused. He shook his head. You're pointing at the wall. My face started to flush. I wasn't insane. It was an actual door. I was able to touch it, go through it, take up residence within it. However, nobody else was able to view it. I was resolved not to sleep that night, so I stayed up. It started dripping again at precisely 3:12 a.m. I switched the light on. The puddle had returned, this time growing larger, and my shoes were being lapped by the dark water. The hallway was once again visible via the glass. There, staring at me with hollow eyes, was my other self. The shapes behind him were suddenly more distinct, mouths moving in perfect harmony, dozens of pale figures pressing against the glass. I put my ear on the window. I also heard it. Whispers. Layered, soft, and unavoidable. The reflection lifted its hand and flattened it against the glass, saying, "Switch." I didn't want to lift my own hand, trembling, shaky, creeping toward the window. As soon as my fingers contacted the chilly surface, the door shook. 3 deliberate, slow knocks. Then a voice. My own words. Let me in. I remained motionless, unable to move. The voice outside my cabin door was mine, with the same accent and flawless syllables. It repeated, calmly at first, then, more forcefully, let me in. All right, me. My chest constricted. My shaking palm was still hovering against the glass, just inches from the hand of my reflection. His lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile as his empty eyes met mine. Pale shapes writhed against the glass of the corridor behind him. Their jaws parted at the sides and stretched abnormally as their mouths widened and widened. As they whispered, "Switch!" Again and again, more volume, more powerful. Make a switch, change, switch. The door shook once more forcefully. The handle turned. I staggered back and said, "Remain away." My voice broke in fear. The knocking ceased. Silence reigned for a moment. My other self then leaned forward and pressed his face against the glass in the reflection. His mouth moved slowly and purposefully. "You're inside already." I stopped. I felt sick to my stomach. I surveyed the cabin, taking in the flickering lights, the dripping seawater, and the walls that groaned like strain on metal. Then I understood. This cabin wasn't mine. The reflection was like this. No one was attempting to enter when they knocked on the door. I was the one, attempting to escape. The glass broke into pieces. The pale faces, pressing harder from the opposite side, caused cracks to spiderweb across it. Inside my skull, the murmurs turned into yells. "Switch! Change! Change!" The frigid fingers of the reflection's hand encircled my wrist as it exploded through the glass. The water rushed up over my legs, ankles, and chest in a surge. The lights flickered violently and I gasped for oxygen. Then there was stillness. I was standing in the hallway when I opened my eyes. Dry, be calm. Everything is typical. The flooring was spotless. The lights are constant. People holding drinks and laughing passed by. I turned around. It was a smooth wall, no door. Cabin 6B12 is not available. Just plain, endless wallpaper. I briefly believed I had just dreamed it all. Perhaps it had been a bad dream. Then I noticed my reflection in a nearby picture frame's glass. It had a smile on its face. I wasn't. Story 4. It seemed like a dream on the first day. As people lined up with their bags, children tugged at their parents' hands. Teens took pictures with the tall ship in the background. And the sun shone over Miami, music blaring. Energy was in the air, the kind of energy that only comes at the beginning of a long-awaited holiday. Like everyone else, I checked in, went through security with ease, and entered the gangway. Gleaming white in the sunlight, the cruise liner towered over me like a floating skyscraper. Inside, the lobby glistened with polished flooring, glass chandeliers, and cheerfully smiling staff members holding champagne trays as they greeted us. It was just as I had dreamed. With a nice bed, a window overlooking the infinite blue ocean, and the quiet hum of the engines below, my cabin was compact but comfortable. After unpacking and changing, I went to the upper deck to join the crowd for the sail-away party. People danced, alcohol flowed, and music beat. As Miami's skyline faded into the distance, everyone rejoiced as the horn sounded, deep and lengthy. Paradise had just begun. A young couple on their honeymoon, an elderly woman traveling alone, and a man in his 40s who introduced himself as David were the 4 strangers seated at the table with me at supper that evening. We shared stories about our adventures, ate, and laughed. Wine flowed freely. The crew served steak and lobster, and by dessert, we felt as though we had known each other for years. But toward the end of the meal, an odd event occurred. With a smile, the head waiter came to our table and inquired if we were happy with everything. He then looked at the vacant seat next to me and said, "And your friend?" he inquired. I scowled. "Which friend?" "The woman who was seated here." He gestured to the spotless tablecloth, the bread roll unopened, the silverware carefully arranged, and the glass of water dripping into it. She didn't place an order? We all exchanged perplexed glances. The pair gave a headshake. No one was sitting there, the elder woman stated, and the waiter paused, obviously uneasy. He then made an effort to grin. He vacated the unaltered area and rushed out, saying, "Ah, maybe a mistake in the seating chart." We dismissed it with laughter. A minor confusion, not a huge deal. However, I passed a hallway where the personnel kept their carts and extra linens later that evening on my way back to my cabin. I noticed someone standing there out of the corner of my eye. A female. Her hair was dripping wet and she looked pallid, as if she had just climbed out of the ocean. Her eyes were dark and hollow as she gazed at me for a moment before disappearing into the darkness. I went cold, my chest constricted. Was that what I'd seen? I locked the door as soon as I got to my cabin. It was fatigue, perhaps too much wine, I told myself, but I knew in my heart. At supper, the vacant chair hadn't been vacant at all. The cruise's second day got off to a very typical start. Waiters circulated with cocktail trays, children splashed in the pool, and sunlight flooded across the decks. As though we were 100 miles from reality, everyone appeared at ease. However, I was unable to forget what I had witnessed the previous evening. That lady. Her hair was wet and stuck to her face. Those eyes are hollow. Perhaps I had a dream. Perhaps it was simply fatigue. As I headed to breakfast, I reminded myself of that. The pair from my dinner table, however, were already there and beckoned to me. "Did you not see her as well?" As I sat down, the woman whispered. I went cold. "Who did you see?" "The woman," her husband muttered. "The one at the meal." I gazed at them while she sat next to you. They both shook their heads when the waiter inquired about her, but the chair was empty. "No, she was present. We thought so anyway. Blue outfit, blonde hair. However, she appeared to be hazy whenever we attempted to look at her directly. I felt chilly, as if we were having trouble concentrating." Leaning in, the elderly woman at our table joined us. "I also saw her." We all turned, but David insisted he didn't see anyone when I questioned him later. David was drinking coffee on the other side of the room. He looked at us, scowled, and gave us a hard shake of his head. He mouthed, "No one was there." There was stillness in our group. I proceeded to the guest services desk after breakfast. "How do you complain about a ghost?" I wasn't sure what to say. However, curiosity was more intense than terror. I said to the crew member, "Pardon me, could you tell me who was assigned to cabin 728? The woman's eyes scanned the screen as she tapped at her computer. Then she scowled. "Sir, cabin 728 is empty." I swallowed. "Since we left Miami, are you certain?" "Since last night," she interrupted abruptly. "I'm positive." There was no room for inquiry in her tone. No one boarded under that number. The vacant chair reappeared during dinner that evening, arranged the place setting precisely, sweating on the towel from a glass of water. However, the waiter made no mention of it this time. He sped by it as though it didn't exist, avoiding it entirely. The elder woman tensed up and stared at the chair halfway through the meal. She said, "She's back." I followed her eyes. I briefly caught a glimpse of it as well. On the table was a pale hand, soft tapping of fingers on the fabric. The pair let out a gasp. The spouse prayed quietly to himself. David appeared enraged as he abruptly got up, toppling his chair in the process. "Enough. Put an end to this bullshit." He hurried off without touching his food. Until dessert was served, we sat in uncomfortable quiet, and there was something waiting for me when I eventually made it back to my cabin that evening. There was a tiny plastic card on the floor outside my door. My hands were shaking when I took it up. The good crew members wore a name badge. However, I had never met any of the crew members whose names were on it. It said only Passenger 728. The tag was moist on the back. The dining hall didn't feel right on the third night. The couple, the older woman and I, were seated at the table as usual. David's seat was vacant. We initially believed he was running late. Even a glass of water was poured for him by the waitress. But as the minutes passed, we began to feel uneasy. It was evident by dessert. David was not coming. The pair looked at each other anxiously. "Was he spotted today?" the spouse inquired. I hadn't. The older woman had not. We checked after supper. The lights were off in his cabin, and the door was locked. A passing steward attested, "Mister, he spoke in a flat, practiced tone, as if he had been coached exactly what to say. David hasn't been seen since last night. Attention guests, we regret to inform you that passenger David has disembarked due to personal reasons," was the notice that was broadcast over the intercom the following morning. "Respect his privacy, please." A lie. We found ourselves in the midst of the sea. Not a port. There isn't a missing lifeboat. The team, however, wanted us to think he had just departed. I returned to the guest services desk that afternoon and demanded answers. The woman at the counter maintained a fixed smile. I pushed my hand against the counter and said, "Sir, there is no record of a passenger by that name. He and I had dinner together. Every day I saw him. How are you able to say that?" She simply reiterated, "There is no record of a passenger by that name." Her eyes moved anxiously to the side, toward her supervisor, who was seeing us from the other side of the lobby, but her grin remained constant. I couldn't sleep that night, so I explored the hallways. With the exception of the odd creak of metal and the faint hum of motors, the ship remained silent. I heard something as I walked past a door reserved for the crew. Voices. I put my ear on the door. It was muted at first, but then I knew it was David. He was yelling, terrified and enraged. "Give me a break, this is not possible. This is not where I should be." My blood became icy. I pounded the door. "David, it's me." Everything fell silent for a moment. Then he spoke again, but in a softer tone. "Choked. In a desperate situation. Avoid putting me in 728. The lights in the hallway flickered. Deep and strange, a low hum shook the floor, as if the ship itself were growling. With a pounding heart, I staggered back. The door was open when the lights stabilized. There was no one in the storage area. All that was left of the doorway was a trail of damp footprints that ran down the hallway and into cabin 728. I shuddered and followed them. Under the lights, every footprint shone as if the water had never dried. Just outside the cottage door, they came to a halt. 728 glinted on the license plate. I reached for the handle with a trembling hand. My skin was being bitten by the icy metal. I opened the door slowly. It was dark inside the cabin. Wet. The walls seemed to be perspiring and dripping. The smell of rot and salt permeated the heavy air. The woman was sitting on the bed there. Her flesh was damply stuck to by her blue garment. She had dropping strands of hair. Slowly, she raised her eyes to mine. She grinned. David's cruise card was on the nightstand next to her, wet as ever. Her smile was incorrect. Too big, too still. It's the kind of smile that's captured in a timeless old snapshot. The sound of trickling water reverberated throughout the cottage as I remained motionless in the doorway. The dank, oppressive air seemed to breathe through the walls. "David?" I muttered. The woman's head tipped. Like seaweed, her damp hair slid across her face. She lifted her hand gently, pointing to the nightstand. Water droplets gathered around David's cruise card, which gleamed in the low light. I snatched it up and staggered forward. It was freezing. In bold letters was his name. His picture was grinning back at me. Evidence. But she was gone when I looked back at the bed. The linens were wet. The mattress drooped as if there was still a weight on it. The salty, rotting smell of the ocean, like something plucked from the depths, intensified. Then I heard it. Steps. Behind me. I whirled. There were passengers in the doorway. There were many of them, their complexion gray and pale, their garments soaked. Water was dripping from their lips as their mouths hung wide. They had a blank look in their eyes, but I knew who they were. Our dining table's older woman. The couple on their honeymoon. David, too. They were all in the hall, standing quietly, observing me. The woman was back, standing next to me. Her slimy, icy hand brushed against mine. Her lips nearly touched my ear as she moved in close. "Now you've seen us," she muttered. She spoke in a hurried voice. "You can't turn back." I stumbled back, my heart racing. "What are you looking for from me?" Her smile got bigger. "To recall." The walls trembled. There was a vibration in the floor. The cabin door then slammed behind me, rattling the ceiling with its force. Darkness. I can't recall how much time I spent there. With each breath, the air became thicker. Even though I knew we were still far inside the ship, I could still hear the sound of waves crashing. In the darkness, faces emerged, flitting in and out, silent mouths yelling, then nothing. I was back in my own cabin when I woke up. I had dry clothes. I made my bed. Through the window, the morning sun gleamed as if nothing had happened. I briefly believed it to be a nightmare, till I entered the corridor. All the cabin doors were open. Every room is deserted. Baggage strewn about, partially unpacked. Food plates left in the dining hall in the middle of a bite. The chairs at the pool were empty. The whole ship was quiet. I dashed to the lobby. No employees, no crew, no travelers. Only me. Then a voice crackled across the intercom. "Please go back to your cabin, passenger 728. My stomach turned. I shook my head and staggered back. No, I'm not," I said. But then I turned to gaze down. A name tag wrapped around my neck. It was the same one that I had discovered 2 nights before outside my cabin. The writing was distinct this time. 728. The voice returned, this time gentler, almost tender. "This is your home." The lights wavered. The ship let out a moan. All of a sudden, I was no longer standing in the deserted lobby. I had returned to cabin 728. The bed was wet. The walls are dripping. The woman in the shadows, grinning at me. And there was no way out this time. Story 5. We knew something wasn't right from the first announcement. Not welcome. A voice crackling over the intercom as the ship sailed out of port said, "Attention passengers, once aboard, you will not be permitted to disembark until the journey is complete." It was an odd thing to say. There was no happy bon voyage. Assuming it was a crude reminder of safety regulations, everyone chuckled uneasily. However, a shiver went up my back. Since the length of the trip had not been stated, it was heaven for the first 2 days. Unending food, dazzling pools, and blue skies. The team was courteous but odd. They didn't have name tags, they didn't identify themselves, and their smiles seemed a little forced, similar to actors reciting lines from a script. By the 3rd night, inquiries started to come in. When will we make our first stop? Where are we going? The staff consistently provided the same response. Soon. The ship didn't slow down, didn't turn, a never-ending sea in all directions. Unease spread by the 5th day. One individual attempted a straight question to the captain. He didn't come back from the bridge. His chair was cleared at dinner as if he had never been there. I heard something outside the door of my cottage that night, a low voice mumbling numbers, followed by a sound like 2 dragging footsteps. With my heart racing, I put my ear against the door. The voice became more distinct. I looked at the number on my door and said, 789. 710. It was a counting voice, and it was drawing nearer. Initially, nobody took note of anything odd. Why would we? The idea of a cruise is to feel timeless. Every area of the ship feels like a resort floating on blue glass. Days blend together in the sun, and cocktails are served non-stop. That was the first day. Live music filling the air, children swimming in pools, and sunshine on the deck. My little yet tidy cabin has a small balcony with a view of the infinite horizon and nice linens. Excellent. I spent hours exploring. There are theaters with velvet seats, restaurants that serve everything from sushi to burgers, and a casino that is alive with the sound of coins and laughing. The crew nodded and smiled wherever I went, courteous but aloof. The initial announcement we heard was the only strange thing. Attention passengers, once aboard, you will not be permitted to disembark until the journey is complete. That odd, flat voice on the intercom as we left port was not given any attention. We all chuckled, shrugged, and raised a glass to our trip. However, the words stuck in my head. Until the trip is finished. What trip? And where were we going? Some of the passengers started to ask questions by the second night. When will we make our first stop? At supper, someone inquired. "We're meant to dock in the Bahamas, right?" said a woman in a flowery dress as she leaned across her table. The waiter gave a courteous grin. "Soon" was not the response. It was not even a response, just a term that was said repeatedly any time someone inquired. Soon. The murmurs became more audible by the fourth day. We had spent almost a week at sea. There is no land in view. There are no port stops, no outings, nothing, just water. And the most peculiar aspect? The captain had gone unnoticed. Not once. The passengers became agitated. In the buffet line, I heard fights and demands for clarification. Nobody understood what the crew meant when they said, "Your journey will be complete soon." There was a sound that woke me up on the sixth night. It dragged lightly like bare feet on carpet. Heart pounding, I sat up and listened. As it moved along the hallway outside my cabin, the sound got closer. Then a voice. I froze when I heard a low, harsh mutter. 1, 2, 3. It was a counting voice. I slipped over to the door and put my ear to it. The sound of footsteps approached. The sound of the counting increased. 6, 7, 8. I was in cabin 710. I trembled and covered my mouth. 9. The voice ceased speaking, directly outside my door. Quiet. I remained motionless, didn't take a breath. Hours passed in the span of seconds. Finally, the footsteps faded into the distance and trailed away. The corridor was alive with whispering in the morning. Next to mine, cabin 709, was deserted. The bed was prepared. The bags are gone. The 3-member family who had been residing there disappeared. What did the crew say? How did they disembark early? We found ourselves in the midst of the sea. Not a port. No land. And I knew exactly what was going to happen when the counting resumed that evening. I didn't get any sleep the next night. With the lights off, I laid in bed and strained to hear the sound. My heartbeat accelerated with each ship creak and distant engine sound. Then, shortly after midnight, it arrived. The footsteps were dragging. Slow. Heavy. Down the corridor. 1. I felt my skin crawl. The voice was cracked and low, like though it belonged to someone who was very old or very dead. 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. Down the hallway, doors squeaked open. I heard muted sobbing, gasps, and people squeezing against their cabin walls. It was heard by all. Everyone was aware. 6, 7. I gripped my blankets tightly, feeling as though my heart would explode. 8. My door. I forced myself not to yell or move while I bit my lip till it bled. The last number was whispered by the voice. 9. Quiet. It felt as though someone or something was waiting outside my door since the air was thick and heavy. The footsteps then dragged slowly away. That night, I didn't get any sleep at all. Another cabin was deserted by daybreak, 711 this time. A couple who recently got married. Their bed was still warm, their luggage was undamaged, and their door was ajar. Lost. The ship was filled with rumors that spread like fire. I heard a man remark to his wife in the dining hall, "It's always at midnight, in order at all times." Another leaned in. "They're counting us down." Panic broke out on the 8th day. In the foyer, a throng of people surrounded the crew and demanded answers. "Where are those that are missing?" one yelled. "What is the status of this vessel?" With their matching smiles fixed on their faces, the crew stood in silence. The passengers erupted as one finally said, "Your journey will be complete soon." A crew member was shaken by one man who took him by the collar. "Be honest with us," he let out a yell. The crewman's smile remained constant. However, one tear trickled down his cheek. Then he turned and went through a staff-only entrance without saying anything. After him, it slammed shut. The man went after it. He was never seen by us again. I tried something new that evening. I waited while still awake. I hardly unlocked my cabin door when the counting started. 1, 2, 3. The emergency lights were the only source of light in the dim hallway. And there it was. With bare feet dragging and a trail of wet on the carpet, a shadowy figure glided down the hallway. Its long hair hung like damp ropes, and its head was bowed low. Its hand touched each door as it reached out to count, and the lights flickered with each number. It arrived at my door. I didn't breathe. It touched the handle with damp fingers. The lights went off. The figure was gone when they flickered back on. However, a fresh voice murmured in my ear. By the 10th night, nobody was acting. "You're next." There was no denying the cottages were empty. Whole families have left, leaving their shoes by the bed, their bags neatly placed, and their toothbrushes still wet. Disappeared, like if they had been taken directly out of the world. Refusing to go back to their quarters, passengers gathered in the dining hall. While mindlessly grinning while serving lunch, the workers remained silent regarding the disappearance. A group of men decided they had had enough that night, after hearing the same cliched response to every question. "Your journey will be complete soon." One said, "We'll fight it," in a tremulous voice that could be heard throughout the hallway. "I don't care if it's a monster or a ghost. We don't hide when the counting begins tonight. Our doors are not locked. We stop it." The crowd echoed with murmurs. Some, desperate for hope, nodded. Others murmured prayers and shook their heads. I wanted to think he was real. I hoped we would have a chance. I stayed with them in the hall that night. 6 men carrying broom handles, kitchen knives, and anything else they could find. Every breath was taut with anticipation as we sat in quiet as the ship creaked all around us. Then it arrived. The footsteps were dragging. 1. The temperature dropped. In the low light, my breath became hazy. 2. The men tightened their hold on their improvised weapons. 1 said a prayer to himself. Then we spotted it. 3, 4. The silhouette floated into sight. Wet tracks left by bare feet. Seawater matted long hair. Its hand extended out, brushing each door as it went by, but its face was hidden, hunched low. One of the men yelled, 5, and rushed forward, waving the handle of his broom. It entered the figure directly. We were soaked as water sprayed over the walls. The figure remained still, didn't even hesitate. 6. The lights wavered. One of the men was gone when they returned. Wet and shiny, his knife clattered to the ground. 7. Another vanished. His scream reverberated inside the walls rather than from the hallway. The survivors were devastated. They fled, banging on cabin doors and stumbling over one another. 8. I stood motionless, immobile. Ahead, my cabin door loomed. 9. The figure came to a halt. At my door. Its hand lay on the handle. Its head rose slowly. And I saw its face for the first time. It wasn't an unknown person. David was the one. The man who disappeared a few days ago. His eyes were lifeless and pallid. Seawater poured out of his wide mouth and down his chin. "You're up next," he muttered. The lights went off. I found myself alone in the hallway when they flickered back on. The blades. The men. The figure. Lost. There was nothing left but a trail of damp footsteps that led to the crew-only door at the end of the hall. I also recognized for the first time that the counting wasn't random. It was more than just a decision. It had a list to follow. My number was nearly up as well. I hesitated as I followed the trail of damp footprints to the steel door marked crew only. My whole body shouted to turn back, to shut myself in my cabin and pray. However, I knew it was pointless. My number had been heard. Next was me. I clutched the handle with a trembling fist. It was slippery with seawater and frigid. I opened it. The hallway on the other side was incorrect. It wasn't like the rest of the ship. No bright lights, no carpet. There are only exposed metal walls that are soaking wet and steam-hissing pipes. The air was moist, heavy, and rotted. Voices were heard as well. Whispers, many of them, overlapping, reverberating through the steel hallways. I immediately recognized the passengers who had gone missing. The pair from next door. The elderly woman I had chatted with during breakfast. David, your journey will be complete soon. Their voices merged into a single, terrifying statement, and I followed the tracks farther and farther. Even though we were already below deck, the halls twisted in unfathomable ways, with doors opening into corridors that wrapped back on themselves and staircases leading below. I finally made it. A huge room. The floor was ankle-deep in water, and the walls were dripping wet. There were orderly rows of chairs in the middle, resembling a theater. Every chair was in use. Like corpses hauled from the sea, the passengers sat motionless, their skin swollen and pale, their garments drenched. Their eyes were open, staring straight ahead, unblinking. "Your journey will be complete soon," they said repeatedly, their tongues moving in unison, and the person stood at the very front on a small platform. It looked up. With each blink, its face changed between every missing passenger I had ever seen, including David, the couple, and the elderly woman. It landed on mine at last, my own face. It grinned. "You're up next," it declared. The murmuring ceased. In perfect unison, hundreds of heads turned to face me. At my feet, the sea rippled. As though the ship itself were breathing, the walls moaned. The counting then resumed. Every mouth in the room echoed the sound. 1, 2. The lights brightly flashed. 3. My heart thumping, I staggered back, looking for a door, an exit, anything. 4. More voices joined in. The water rose, slapping my knees and circling me like unseen hands as I said. 5. 6. The passengers, faces contorted, their mouths agape, and water gushed out of them like waterfalls. I said 7, but the barrage of murmurs drowned out my words. 8. The figure approached, its hand dripping toward my chest, its face still wearing mine. The voices ceased. 9. There was a sudden silence in the room. Then there was darkness. I was back in my cabin when I opened my eyes. The linens were dry. Through the window, the sun was shining. Families laughing, kids running along the corridors, and personnel carrying food trays. The ship was a hive of activity. It appeared as though nothing had occurred. However, I felt sick to my stomach as soon as I entered the hallway, because I made everyone smile. The crew's unwavering, robotic smile from the first day. And I noticed the license plate when I looked at my cabin door, not 710, 728. The number that is cursed. Attention passengers, once aboard, you will not be permitted to disembark until the journey is complete. I glanced down at my hands as the intercom crackled above me, that flat voice resonating across the ship. Water gathered on the carpet as it trickled from my fingertips. I was no longer waiting for the counting, I realized with a shiver of conviction. Now I was the counter. Story 6. The voyage's first 3 days went flawlessly. Blue skies that appeared to go on forever, serene waves that stretched into the horizon, and sunshine on the decks. Weather that vacation brochures often promise but seldom deliver. The ocean appeared to be nothing more than a glittering background to paradise. People laughed at the pool, and music continued to play late into the night. However, everything changed on the 4th night. First, there were clouds. Walls of black rise out of nowhere, not the gentle ones that drift languidly across the horizon. By dinner, the sky had disappeared beneath a thick layer of storm clouds that made it seem as though the sun had been turned off. The air smelled harsh and metallic, like the taste of lightning before it strikes, and the wind grew stronger, whistling through the rails. Over the intercom, the captain's cool, practiced voice said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a passing storm system. Until further notice, please stay inside. But here's the thing. Before boarding, I looked at the forecast. It said there would be no storms for hundreds of miles and the seas would be calm. Other travelers had as well. This kind of storm couldn't have just popped up. The waves hit at midnight. Plates and glasses shattered in the dining hall as the ship swayed fiercely. Children sobbed, people gripped the railings, and the team rushed to lock down the furniture. With a fury that sounded more like fists hammering to get in than water, rain beat against the glass. We assured ourselves that it was only a terrible night. However, morning arrived. Furthermore, the storm persisted. With lightning slicing the horizon and thunder rolling incessantly, the sky was as dark as midnight. Steel twisting like something living, the ship moaned with each wave. Beyond the railings, we could only see a few feet. The ocean has changed from being blue to a black, swirling emptiness. The storm never subsided as day gave way to night, and night to day again. Not for a moment. Passengers began whispering around the third day. How come it hasn't cleared? How about we go back? Why isn't anyone informing us of the situation? I spoke with a crew member about rerouting. His voice was tight and his face was pallid. We are unable to. We are surrounded by the storm. That night, I listened to the ship creak and moan, the walls trembling with each thunderclap. I made an effort to convince myself that it was simply terrible luck and a lengthy storm, but I sensed it in my gut. You couldn't sail through this storm. There was more to this. Something that resisted our departure. People stopped asking when the storm would end by the 7th day inside. They began to inquire as to whether it would. The decks were shut down for good. Chairs were secured, lifeboats were secured, and pools were emptied as the waves snagged at them like enormous hands. The formerly vibrant corridors became quieter, with sobs and murmurs replacing the laughter. Meals grew smaller. They were rationing supplies. The buffet lines that we had only been enjoying a few days before now offered half-portioned, cold sandwiches and soft crushed fruit. No one bought the crew's insistence that it was temporary until the storm clears. The walls of the huts creaked all the time. Every few minutes, a boom of thunder rocked the lights. The ship pitched and tossed so violently that sleeping was virtually impossible. I clung to the edge of my bed for hours, listening to drawers smash and slide open with each swing. Time itself started to haze. Days became an interminable, gloomy twilight as a result of the storm. We couldn't see the sun or stars, couldn't differentiate morning from night. The thunder of waves, the moan of steel, and the unrelenting pounding of rain all felt the same even as the clocks ticked away. People became agitated, furious. 2 men yelled at a steward in the dining hall, wanting to know what he was talking about. One struck the table with his fist. This has been going on for about a week. How about we go back? The steward's eyes were sunken from sleep deprivation, and his face was pallid. I will never forget what he whispered. There is no turning back. Another staff member hurriedly dragged him away, putting on a false smile and comforting the passengers, saying, "The storm is everywhere." However, the harm had already been done. Like flames, fear spread. After 7 days, rumors began to circulate. Some claimed that we were ensnared in an unusual weather system, an unending storm that was impossible for satellites to forecast. Others asserted that the storm had driven us into unfamiliar territory and that we were lost. The fact that the storm wasn't weather at all, however, was the one that chilled me the most, that it was living. I made an effort to ignore the thought, but occasionally I thought it was real. The lightning seemed to be chasing us as it always struck in patterns close to the ship. At times, the thunder rolled like a growl rather than a sound. I once swear I saw figures in the water as I was standing near a window. Whale-sized shadows that rise and fall just below the surface. On the 9th day, passengers started to vanish. We initially believed they were hiding in their cabins and wouldn't come out. However, their rooms were later discovered to be empty, with all of their possessions and luggage still present. Lost. Overnight, a woman in the cabin next to mine vanished. Until security showed up, her husband beat on her door and yelled her name. They looked everywhere. Not a trace. As the storm raged harder than ever that night, I lay awake once more and came to a terrible realization. It was more than just a trap. We were being taken. The ship began to feel more like a coffin, floating aimlessly in the middle of nowhere on the 10th day. The crew's polished smiles had vanished as they attempted to keep the peace. Their eyes were bloodshot, their speech were clipped, and their outfits were wrinkled. Like the passengers, they were collapsing. People lost faith in them. At breakfast, a man whispered to me, "They're hiding something, if you can call it that. Only weak coffee and a piece of bread." His voice trembled as he said, "They know what this storm is. They simply won't tell us." At night, sobs and whispers filled the corridors. The child's parents were pleading with her to go to sleep as she wailed uncontrollably down the hallway. In the living room, an elderly woman prayed loudly while holding a rosary so firmly that her knuckles were bleeding. Then came the disappearances. Someone else was gone every day. At night. Always. Never a sound. Their beds are empty, but their cabins are still filled with possessions. Nobody ever witnessed them departure. They were never seen being taken. Panic began by the 10th day. The crew halted a group of passengers who attempted to push the lifeboats down. "Out there, you'll perish," one of the officers yelled. "You shall be torn apart by the waters. It's better to try than to wait for whatever this is," the men cried back. They were dragged away, locked inside their cabins. I heard fists pounding on doors, pleading to be let out, coming from the corridor that night. Then, quiet. Those cabins were deserted by daybreak. I began recording the number in my journal. 3 are absent on day 12. Day 13, 2 more. At least 6 on day 14. Although the figures were hazy, it was evident that there were less and fewer of us left every day. And the storm continued to rage, never letting up, never moving. Every few minutes the sky is split by lightning. There was so much thunder that it felt like a second heartbeat. The ship creaked and strained, rocking continuously, as though it wanted to give up too. I went to the observation deck one night because I couldn't take the stuffy air in my cabin. I could feel the rain hitting my flesh like needles. The wind howled, like voices screaming. Then, for a brief instant, something was shown by the lightning. A shape loomed above the waterline and the waves. A shadow. It was bigger than the ship itself, too big to be true. A contorted mass of black, with shape and purpose, shifting like storm clouds. And I saw it move just before the lightning went out. It leaned in closer, observing us. I stumbled back, trembling and soaked, my heart hammering in my chest. The following morning I told another passenger, and she didn't laugh. After 15 days, the storm no longer felt like weather, and she merely muttered. I saw it too. It had the feel of a cage, alive, clever. The worst of all is being patient. It was more than just a trap. We were being hunted. By the 16th day, the ship was silent, but it was surrender rather than calm. Eyes were empty and conversations became shorter. We ceased to demand answers and to ask questions. We all knew in our hearts that the storm would not end. The team did not look at each other. They ceased making announcements. It had been days since the captain's once steady voice could be heard over the intercom. Even he seemed to have given up. The ship lost electricity on the 16th night. The lights went off entirely, after flickering once and twice. Everything was engulfed in darkness. The only light was provided by the incessant lightning strikes outside, which left the ship frozen in eerie, motionless images of frightened faces, shaking hands, and shadows moving where none should. There was panic. Fumbling in the dark, people screamed in the hallways. Footsteps pounded, doors banged, glass broke somewhere. As though feeding on the turmoil within, the storm outside raged louder. I gripped the walls as I moved in the direction of the stairway. All I could think of was getting to the top deck so I could breathe before the walls closed in entirely. I heard it at that point, a sound from below, not from the ship or the storm, vibrating through the steel beneath my feet, deep and resonant, something like breathing, slow, huge, inhuman. I was hit hard by the realization. We weren't the only ones surrounded by the storm. Something happened. Something living. We were inside it too. I was flung into the railing as the ship suddenly tilted. Screams could be heard as doors exploded, Bags rolled over the floor, and passengers fell downstairs. Water flooded the hallways as it poured in through smashed windows. The last lightning strike followed. I could clearly see the entire horizon light up for a brief moment. A face, something huge and hideous, made of water and clouds, was staring right at us. It was neither human nor animal. Like storms inside storms, eyes. With a thunderclap so thunderous it shook every bone in my body, a mouth opened. Then there was stillness. I was in a hospital bed when I woke up. They informed me that we were lost, helpless, and adrift in calm waters until a cargo ship discovered us. Be calm, like there had never been a storm. The doctors, however, exchanged uncomfortable glances when I inquired about the others. Others? At last, one said, "You were alone on board." I am certain that is untrue. I recall the travelers, I recall the cries. The faces in the lightning are still in my memory. The storm did not simply dissipate, they took it. Each and every one. The slow, heavy sound of breathing in the clouds is something I occasionally hear again, late at night, when the wind howls outside my window, awaiting my arrival. Because a storm can be avoided by sailing. However, you cannot sail away from an unending situation. And if you find that scary, just wait till you hear what happens on a cruise ship when the lights go out. At midnight, the screaming begin, but the halls go quiet. Quiet. Story 7. We saw the ship shortly after dawn, drifting in silence with no signal or flag. We boarded at lunchtime. By sunset, we realized we weren't alone. It was supposed to be the highlight of the cruise, a calm morning at sea, nothing but sunlight glinting off the waves. I saw it while drinking coffee on the observation deck. A dark object sliced through the sea far out on the horizon. A vessel. I initially believed it to be another cruise liner, but as it got closer, the characteristics became more obvious and odd. Long strips of its fading paint were peeling off. Windows broke. Like dried blood, streaks of rust flowed down the hull. No music, not a move, nothing but quiet. An apparition. Soon after, the words, "Attention passengers," were announced. "We have spotted a ship that has been abandoned. Please stay inside while the crew looks into it for your safety." Abandoned. That's what they called it. But I saw movement, I swear. A shadow creeping through a shattered window. Curiosity prevailed by lunchtime. As the crew lowered a boat, a few of us gathered on deck. We pleaded to come. They permitted it against their better judgment. The air grew cooler as we got closer. Goosebumps pricked my flesh. My sneakers clattered against the deck as I climbed aboard. The day was quiet and dry, but everything was slippery with seawater. The smell of rot and salt filled the corridors. Strips of wallpaper hung. The ship's doors creaked like whispers as they opened and closed with each shift. Then we caught sight of it. Tables are still set in a dining room. Half-eaten, mold-covered plates of food. Glasses with murky water in them. The chairs pushed back, as though somebody had hurried out. No people, though. No bodies. "Everyone just disappeared," mumbled one of the crew, but I shook my head, because I noticed them as we turned to go. Fingerprints. Dozens of them. Scratched all over the walls. Damp. New. It was as though someone or something was still present. We divided into two groups, with half of us moving below and the other half searching the top decks. The moist, oppressive air inside felt heavier now, as though the walls themselves were breathing. I went past bedroom after cabin, all the same. Luggage half open, beds unmade, possessions strewn about as if their owners had just disappeared in the middle of the journey. One showed a kid's toy on the ground, a small plush bear. The room was bone dry, yet its fur was wet through and leaking steadily. In another, there was fog in the mirror. I wiped it with my palm and then froze. The room was exactly depicted in the reflection, yet I wasn't there. "Let's get out of here," a crew member muttered behind me, his voice cracking and trembling with panic. However, we didn't. We pushed harder. Strangely, The hall was longer than it should have been, and twisted, with the doors repeating the same number on each cabin: 213, 213, 213. We started to hear whispers. Like the ocean inside seashells, it is initially faint, then more lucid. A group of voices whispering incomprehensible phrases. Then, all of a sudden, one of them was evident. My name was said. Staring at the door next to me, I froze. The handle turned slowly, by itself. "Avoid opening it," a passenger yelled. However, curiosity was more intense than terror. I extended my hand to push it open. Inside, the room was deserted, aside from the bed. The red-soaked sheets were trickling slowly and steadily onto the floor. Let it drip, let it drip, let it drip. I staggered back, gasping on dread, when I saw the 3 words, "We see you," cut into the fabric of the pillow. The scream tore through the hallway at that moment. A member of our group was absent. Carter, a young male, was last seen standing just behind me. The beam of his flashlight shook violently over the walls and clattered to the floor. We looked everywhere in the cottage. Nothing. However, the murmurs had increased in volume. Not far away anymore. Fewer now. Only one. It was the voice of Carter, screaming for assistance, from within the fortifications. We ought to have gone back. The moment Carter disappeared, we ought to have run. Fear, however, made us foolish. "Continue your search," one of the crew members sounded a tremulous bark. Somewhere here he must be. With spotlights piercing the darkness, we pressed farther. Every breath blew white in front of us as the temperature dropped. The muttering came next, always familiar, always close. They occasionally sounded like Carter, pleading with us for assistance. Sometimes, just outside the range of our lights, they sounded like kids laughing. After that, we arrived in the ballroom. It must have been lovely once. The ceiling was adorned with crystal chandeliers that swayed and had broken glass. As if frozen in time, half-filled champagne glasses lined the bar, while upturned chairs littered the floor. However, it was not the chamber that froze us. The footprints were the cause. Dozens of them. There were bare, damp footsteps all over the floor, some big, some small, but none of them led outside. Just circling incessantly. One of the travelers lost it. "This is incorrect. There is life on this ship. We're being played with." Before we could stop him, he ran toward a side door. The door behind him slammed. The air was cut by his shouts. Silence, then a harsh, tearing sound. The chamber beyond was deserted when we pried the door open. His shoes, that is. Wet as ever. The crew's looks revealed that they were just as scared as we were, despite their best efforts to keep us together and project composure. "It's not a rescue," I muttered. Everyone heard my voice, which was hardly audible. This ship wasn't supposed to be found. The understanding hung over us like a dark cloud. We were supposed to board it, since it was accurate. The ship wasn't left behind. It waited. And now, it had us. Only 5 of us remained at this point. 2 crew members and 3 passengers. They had seized the others. One by one. Their cries were absorbed by the walls, always abrupt and hushed. We made the decision to go to the engine room. Perhaps we could maneuver the ship back toward our own ship, if we could get it started. Perhaps flee. It grew worse the lower we went. Seawater poured down the walls in rivulets that resembled tears. When we pushed the doors open, they moaned as though they were hurting. And the murmurs, everywhere. They were no longer arbitrary. They all talked at once. Not Carter, not the others. Each and every one. "Remain with us. Come along. Always." At last, we arrived at the engine room. However, there were no engines. A chasm that is empty. Rows of seats fastened into the steel lined the walls, which were higher than they should have been, and hundreds of passengers were seated in those seats, not only those in our group. People from decades in the past. Their eyes were milky and big, and their attire were outdated, their lips open in silent cries, their skin pallid and wet. Everyone is looking straight forward. awaiting. Our fellow crewman fell to his knees. Whispering through sobs, his voice broke. "It's true. The stories are true. There are no engines aboard this ship. It depends on them." The lights flickered before we could respond. The travelers then turned, each and every one of them. They both opened their jaws. They yelled this time. Blood spurted from my ears, and my bones shook at the sound, which was so unnatural and piercing. The crewmen fell, trembling. My two companions ran out into the night, their cries drowned out. Then, I was by myself. The front row's chairs moved. One was devoid of anything. Awaiting. The chamber was filled with the swelling voices. "Sit." My body moved against my will. I stumbled forward as my legs gave way. I made an ineffective effort to struggle and resist. The air grew thicker as I approached the chair, forcing me down. I fell into it. My wrists were secured by the metal clamps, my ankles, my chest. One voice emerged from the whispers. "You are now ours." The lights went down. My body became chilly. The world flickered in and out, like static as my vision became blurry. Then I realized. This ship wasn't just floating about. They were hunting, looking for fresh passengers to take the place of those it had already ingested. For this reason, it keeps showing up on placid waters. Why does it appear deserted, ready to be boarded? The spacecraft isn't a ghost. It's a trap. My reflection in the steel wall across from me was the last thing I saw before darkness engulfed me. My eyes, like everyone else's, were vacant and pallid. "Stay with us," I said, my mouth spreading wide to say the same words in tandem. Forever. Story 8. Shortly after midnight, the first scream was heard. It sliced through the quiet like a dagger as I was half sleeping in my cabin, lulled by the hum of the engines. Raw, high-pitched, and rife with fear. The voice of a woman. Heart-thumping, I jumped up in bed and strained to listen. The scream reverberated, this time more loudly, and seemed to be carried by the ship's walls as it bounced along the corridors. I hurried over and opened the door. The gentle emergency lights were the only lights shining on the murky hallway outside. A couple doors shattered open, revealing bewildered faces. It wasn't just me who had heard it. The air ripped with another scream, now closer, more volume. It had the sound of someone being ripped apart. Wide-eyed and murmuring, the passengers poured into the hall. One woman shook her head, stating, "No, it's from below," while another male whispered, "It's coming from the deck." Crew members swiftly arrived from the engine room and attempted to reassure us. "Go back to your cabins, please," one urged sternly. "There's no need to be concerned." "Nothing more than mechanical noise," I pondered. "That's not how any machine yells." The hall did, however, ultimately clear. With uneasy grumbling, many went back to their cabins. Every ship creak sounded like a new wail as I tried to fall asleep. At breakfast the following morning, I made inquiries. A few travelers acknowledged hearing it. Others dismissed it and denied it. However, I saw how they avoided making eye contact and how their hands trembled. It happened again that night, midnight. This time, there were multiple screams instead of just one. Layered. Men. Ladies. Kids. A cacophony of pain that appeared to simultaneously emanate from all directions. I dashed to the corridor. Other doors opened. More faces of fear. Once more, however, the team was present and moving swiftly, escorting guests back to their rooms. They reiterated, "Everything is under control. Go back inside, please." But the cries continued. More volume. Nearer. I swear I heard words in them this time. Not only yells. Calls for assistance. The screams became more than whispers on the third night. They had been heard by everybody. At precisely midnight, they began anew, reverberating with frightful clarity across the decks. This time, it's close, not far. Too near. The first one broke the silence, and then another, and another. until it seemed like a whole throng was being massacred in the hallway outside my cabin, and I lay motionless in bed. Along with scores of other passengers, I hurried out once more. People pushing against the walls as though something would burst through, mothers holding their children, and men yelling in fear. Sometimes weak, sometimes thunderous, but always inhumanly desperate, the screams rose and sank. After over an hour, they came to a halt, leaving a heavy silence that seemed inappropriate. I was expecting an announcement the following morning, an explanation, something. However, the captain remained silent. The horrors of the night were not mentioned in the daily bulletin. The whispers were all throughout breakfast. Some travelers claimed that the lower decks were where the cries originated. Others claimed it was the sound of trapped humans. One man reported seeing faces pressed against the glass of his cabin window, pallid, deformed, and wailing silently. The team became icier. They retorted, "There are no screams," when people challenged them. "You're making things up." Making things up? No, we all heard it. The screaming came back that night. More volume. Longer. However, something had changed. One of the voices was familiar to me. While we were waiting in the buffet line, an older woman who I had met only 2 days before told us a story about her travels. She commented that this cruise was her ideal vacation and laughed heartily. And now I knew that the screeching in the darkness was her voice. It wasn't just me. The screams sounded familiar, and passengers started whispering that during the night they could hear the cries of acquaintances, neighbors, and even relatives. However, those same individuals had left when we checked in the morning. Their cabins are deserted, their possessions were abandoned. How did the crew react? It's impossible that they disembarked early. We found ourselves in the midst of the sea. Now there was no denying the reality. There was more to the shouts than echoes. They were travelers, being captured. Who would be next was the horrifying question that persisted with every hushed word and sidelong gaze. By the 5th night, nobody was acting. Before midnight, travelers congregated in the corridors to wait, pray, and whisper. There was nowhere to go, but several gripped their bags as if they were about to run. While their parents rocked them and whispered unbelieved assurances, children sobbed softly. Then it started as the clock struck 12. Like a sword, the first scream ripped through the hallways, then another, and yet another, until the sound became a wall. 100 voices, perhaps more, sobbing, pleading, and screaming. It caused the lights to flicker, the walls to tremble, and the air to seem to quiver with fear. Some people fell to the ground, as others screamed back, shielding their ears. A man yelled, "Stop it!" at the ceiling. "Quit it!" The wave of pain drowned out his voice. It was more than I could handle. I have to be aware. I pursued the sound. Through stairwells, past doorways reserved for crew, and farther within the ship than was intended for guests. Like a rope in the dark, the screams led me forward, always just around the next bend. The screaming on the other side were so loud that I finally arrived at a locked steel door that read, "Authorized personnel only." I pressed my ear to it, my hands shaking, and then I froze. Because I heard a different voice. My neighbor. The woman across from me in the cabin. That very morning, when she carried her breakfast back to her room, she had waved at me with a slight smile. She was screaming now. I screamed for assistance and pounded on the door. I thought I heard her beating back for a moment. Then, suddenly, as if a switch had been flipped, the screaming stopped. Quiet. I felt nauseous. Behind me, the door creaked open. It wasn't my neighbor, but I spun. The crewman had a pallid complexion and a sweat-stained suit. His gaze shifted uneasily up and down the hallway. "You're not supposed to be here," he muttered. "What's going on?" I made a demand. "Where are they? The screaming people?" His lips quivered as he swallowed forcefully. "Avoid asking. Don't pay attention. Simply remain in your cabin and hope it doesn't come for you." He slammed the door shut once more and locked it securely before I could stop him. When the screaming came back that night, I remained in my cabin. However, they were no longer separated. They were within the walls. And I could definitely hear them, voices I recognized, when I put my ear against the metal, pleading for assistance, crying and sobbing. And something else, subtle but indisputable, beneath it all. A growl, low and guttural. Not human, not even close. The ship felt different on the sixth night. Too silent. Long before midnight, travelers crowded in their cabins, lights off, doors closed, as though they were trying to hide from something they couldn't get out of. I waited, still awake. The silence made my ears ache. It was midnight. Nothing for the first time in almost a week. Not a scream. I felt a sharp, brittle wave of relief. Perhaps it was over. Perhaps the nightmare that had plagued us had finally passed. Then I heard it. One shriek. This time it wasn't reverberating down the corridors. Not from the walls. From my cabin. My blood turned to ice as I froze. I instantly recognized the cry when it came again, this time raw and shattered. My voice was heard. As the sound tore through the walls, I staggered back and stared at them. My voice bounced from metal to metal, screaming in pain over and over. Even with my ears covered, it continued. I yelled, "Stop!" However, my voice just added to the chorus, overlapping itself until my own shouts created an unfathomable clamor throughout the cabin. The lights wavered. The walls appeared to shake. The door trembled, and I heard the words, distorted through my own voice, "Join us!" The lock opened slowly and by itself. I kept my hands off of it. I remained motionless. However, the door squeaked open, exposing the dim hallway beyond. They were standing there, the passengers who are missing. They screamed silently, many of them, their eyes empty and pale. Like shadows caught between lightning strikes, their bodies wavered. My neighbor, the elderly lady at the buffet, even kids. They were all looking at me, their features stretching into hideous forms as their jaws hung open wider and wider. The lights went out when they all muttered, "It's your turn," in unison and in my own voice. The time was morning when I woke up. I had a tidy cabin. My possessions remained unaltered. There was silence in the corridor. I stumbled outside, looking about for somebody, but the ship was deserted. Unmade mattresses, unclaimed luggage, and open cabins. Hundreds of travelers have left. There was not another voice. Just me. I swear I could still hear it in the midst of the silence, however faintly, deep inside the walls. I screamed myself, echoing even now, still confined. Wait until you hear the following story if you find it frightening. Because cries and storms aren't always the source of terror. Occasionally, it originates from something worse, the crew of the ship itself.